Neville Chamberlain was the Prime Minister of Britain from 1937 to 1940. During this time, Britain was undergoing a massive economic and social crisis as a result of the Great Depression and World War I. While this crisis in Britain was going on, a different crisis was emerging in Europe as a whole. Hitler was elected the Chancellor of Germany at the time and sought to take the Sudetenland, a part of Czechoslovakia with 3 million ethnic Germans. He threatened war if the land was not turned over to him. Hoping to avoid another world war along with the rest of Europe, Chamberlain signed the Munich Agreement, which would give Hitler the Sudetenland under the condition that that would be the end of Hitler's territorial demands. While this action has been frowned upon, Neville Chamberlain made a justified decision by signing the Munich Agreement, as it gave Britain a chance to revive their economy from World War I, it responded to most of Europe's desire to avoid going into another war at all costs, and it ultimately provided Britain and its allies more time to prepare for war if the need arose. The British economy during the Munich crisis was left unable to sustain another large war. One factor of this would be Britain's staggering unemployment rates throughout the 1930s. Before the Great Depression, Britain's unemployment rates went between 10 and 12%. After the Great Depression, however, unemployment rates rose to 22.8%, approximately 2.75 million people jobless. British censuses in 1931 reported 2,166,806 people above 14 years old out of work in England, and over 4 million people out of work in the Scottish lowlands. Of those that did work, bad working conditions and few days of leave were common. Those who were out of work flooded soup kitchens as their only source of food. British reports state that a fourth of the British population were living under unsubstantial diets. During the time that the Munich Agreement was in effect, however, unemployment rates in Britain started to improve, with rates in 1932 dropping to 15%, and in 1936 the rates were at 8%. Britain was on a path to recovery, and without the peace brought by the Munich Agreement, that recovery would have been halted, and Britain would have been plunged back into another economic crisis. Britain's trade and industry was also suffering as a result of World War I and the Great Depression. The British economy relied heavily on international trade for income. Due to the Great Depression, though, a decline in demand for global products led to a major hit on the UK economy. This decline in income led to Britain lacking the funds to support a rearmament campaign. It initially attempted to trade the goods with the United States, however, the United States' neutrality laws prevented that. The loss of trade opportunities subsequently presented challenges to the coal, iron, steel, and shipbuilding industries that relied mostly on exports to survive. Lacking income and borrowing more money, Britain found themselves with an increasing debt of £7.8 billion. The British Treasury thus deemed that a rearmament campaign would divert needed resources from Britain's industry. If Britain wanted to fight a war with Germany, it would have to support it financially by itself, as it could not trade for resources. Britain was in debt, and it could not divert resources to a rearmament campaign. This led to war being a detrimental option, and thus the Munich Agreement was the alternative. Through the Great Tensions, all parties involved could agree that a World War II should be averted by all costs. The British public were strong advocates for peace settlements that would guarantee a peaceful resolution to the conflict. British politicians also shared this hope to reach a peaceful resolution, one such politician being Neville Henderson. Henderson stated in a letter that he thought that the British press would stop attacking Hitler and look for more peaceful resolutions. These sentiments could be attributed to the fact that the previous war had left the British military with 715,000 deaths and the number of wounded twice that amount. Combined with French losses, the previous war had taken over 1 million casualties. Poll results taken in the immediate aftermath of the Munich conference demonstrated public support for Chamberlain's decision, with around 57% of people happy with Chamberlain's choice. Chamberlain himself also received over 20,000 letters and telegrams thanking him for stopping a war. Other countries also shared these views of avoiding war. The French, for example, were entirely against going to war with Germany, especially because if they did, they could not guarantee support from the British. Though some hoped the Soviet Union might help, most doubted it. Even German citizens were far opposed to going to war, and opposed to Hitler himself. One such example is the case of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German priest who started a rebellion against Hitler. High-ranking members of the German army also joined this rebellion, such as Admiral Wilhelm Canaris, General Hans Oeser, General Paul von Hase, and later Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg. World War I and the Great Depression had left the Allies' military severely underfitted. At the time of the Munich crisis, the British Army was not confident in their ability to fight. They were heavily lacking in manpower and equipment and required time to rearm. At the time, the British Army was cut down to only 5 divisions stationed inside the UK. Even if they were to fight at the time of the Munich crisis, Britain would have only been able to send 2 ill-equipped divisions to assist Czechoslovakia. When the British went through a period of disarmament, it allowed Germany to surpass them in military power. The British cabinet had made it a point that they could not support the resources for another world war. Britain could not rely on any of its main allies to fight in a war either. France, its main ally, had been weakened from World War I as well as the Great Depression. To add on to their troubles, the aforementioned neutrality laws prevented America from being able to provide military and financial assistance. Even though Germany had been placed with hard terms during the Treaty of Versailles, they were still the greatest military power 20 years later, because German rearmament had taken place even before Hitler came into power. When Hitler took control, however, he expanded the German army to more than 500,000 soldiers and developed an air force. The training of these soldiers led them to be one of the most effective and deadly armies of the time. By September 1939, the German army held 100 infantry and 6 armored divisions. The sheer might and deadly efficiency of the German army would be stacked head-to-head with the 130 infantry divisions of the Allies. The Germans also held superiority in the sky, with the Luftwaffe being the most feared air force in all of Europe. During the Munich crisis, the Luftwaffe boasted 4,733 combat planes and 3,562 planes of other types. September of 1939 found them having around 1,000 fighters and 1,050 bombers. The Munich Agreement bought time for the Allies, as shared by Colonel Hastings Ismay, the Secretary to the Committee of Imperial Defense, in his letter to Thomas Inskip, the Minister for the Coordination of Defense. In the letter, Ismay stated that the time bought by the Munich Agreement allowed for the Royal Air Force to develop enough so that they may be strong enough to counter the Luftwaffe. The time bought by the Munich Agreement also allowed the defense spending to be increased to 48% of the budget rather than the earlier 15%. By 1939, after the Munich Agreement, the British and the French outnumbered the Germans in every weapon genre, and all of this took place in the year the Munich Agreement had taken place. The Munich Agreement also allowed time for the public to adjust to the reality of war. Del Negro opines that the resulting British resolve led to British perseverance throughout the war. While perhaps not the best decision to be made, the signing of the Munich Agreement by Neville Chamberlain was justified if analyzed within the context of the time. His actions provided Britain and her allies time to repair their economies and provided Europe with the peace it so longed for. It even provided time for Britain to prepare for a worst-case scenario of war. Though the Munich Agreement will remain a controversial topic, its effects can be seen rippled across history as people learn the lessons shared by it. Such examples include the current conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Today's world leaders have learned the lessons of Munich and are not employing the strategy of appeasement towards President Putin. Though Chamberlain's plan failed in the short term, his actions have directly impacted the decisions and events of today's world.